My wife and I were new at teaching a class for couples in distress, and we had just finished a session when Daniel and Maria called the church looking for help. And there wasn't a class available, but we agreed to meet with them. So they came to our house, they sat down, we asked, what brings you here? And Maria said that they were fighting all the time and could never agree what to do. And last night their son wasn't doing his homework and Daniel wouldn't help. Daniel defended himself and said that their son could figure it out all by himself if he just took the time. So we listened and asked a few questions. We ended up helping them to compromise and to agree on a dedicated homework time for their son, and they would take turns helping him. Well, they left feeling that we helped them, and we felt great about it, and we agreed to see them again. So next week, they came with a new fight with a different issue, and this went on for a few sessions. And it seemed like we were mediating conflict between them instead of teaching them how to change their conflict patterns. And I look back on that experience and I realized that we weren't really helping them very much. I mean, they came and complained and we would help them to resolve their conflicts. So, I asked the question, how do we move a couple forward to help them resolve their own conflicts and not just solve them ourselves? So how do we move from being a mediator to being a mentor? Well, Michelle and I started to realize that we needed to teach healthy marriage concepts and not just mediate their arguments. I mean, I know that Daniel and Maria liked that we helped them to resolve their disagreements, and both of them found it helpful to talk to another couple, and they found that arguments didn't escalate when they were in front of us as much as when they were alone. However, they weren't learning to manage their own conflict. What are the principles that every couple needs that actually work? We started to ask that question, and that led us to develop key concepts that we include in our online course curriculum. So one of our key concepts is that our conflicts tend to form patterns. In other words, we usually fight the same way regardless of the topic. Now, when a couple comes to us with a specific topic that they fight about, like parenting, we ask them about how their fight progresses. What pattern does it form? And it's usually helpful to pick out a disagreement that they recently had, but they aren't still fighting about it. And it's a bit easier for them to reflect on their pattern when they aren't emotionally invested in it at the moment. So we want the couple to recognize their poor conflict patterns and to understand how their conflict works. For example, it might go something like this. He criticizes, she defends, he criticizes again, she dismisses, and then he walks out of the room. And when the couple can recognize their pattern, then they can start to make new choices. And instead of criticizing, perhaps try to understand and validate and see if that works. So we use specific arguments as a way to recognize patterns and key concepts that work. And we want the couple to understand what they can do to change their conflict patterns. One time I was just starting to work with couples. David came to me and told me that his marriage wasn't going well. I quickly quoted Ephesians 5 and told him that husbands need to love their wives. David just as quickly fired back. His wife needed to respect him. When I jumped to being directive or telling someone what to do, it didn't go very well. And I love Scripture. I believe that God has revealed himself to us through the Bible. And I've also come to see that there's a right time to offer advice or to quote Scripture. It takes a relationship to be able to confront people effectively, and they need to understand that you care for them and want the best for them. When you're working with someone that's hurting, or if you don't know them well, then I usually focus on building relationship before I become very confrontational. And I found it to be more helpful to let the marriage education offer the confrontation. So we always use marriage education now in combination with mentoring couples. That allows us to ask something like, what did you think about the concept that criticism tears down a relationship? And that's much softer than just saying something like, why do you criticize so much? So let the marriage education teach the tough principles so that you can focus on helping the couple to apply them. So, tips for marriage mentors. 1, teach couples to solve their own conflicts themselves. It's much better to teach someone to have a healthier relationship than to mediate their arguments. 2, help them to recognize conflict patterns. When a couple recognizes how their conflict pattern impacts their relationship, they can work on changing the pattern and trying things that might work. 3, leverage marriage education. You know, we always leverage marriage education. This allows us to talk about how to apply healthy concepts and principles. So those 3 tips again. 1, teach couples to solve their conflicts themselves. 2, help them to recognize conflict patterns. And 3, leverage marriage education.